Good afternoon. Better late than never. So, Andrew and Bernard, thank you so much for joining me today for a conversation about what could be or could not be the clash of generations. As many of you know, Andrew Liveris is not just a board member of the Public Investment Fund, he's also the president of the Brisbane 2023 Olympic and Paralympic Games, which I'm very honored to serve as an Olympic committee member on that board. And he's also the chairman of Lucid. And Bernard, it is such an honor to have you here, the president of International for Bank of America. You know, you both come from two different perspectives, looking at the world of young people, and not just people that you're employing, but people you're trying to serve. I'd love to understand from your point of view, when we talk about a clash of generations, and we're talking about the business sector, can we detach what is really a social movement that is happening across the world, whether it's East or West, and the needs of this young generation from the needs of business? How do you handle that question?
I think it's a question literally for generations, and if you are like Ray Dalio and study history and what happens in cycles, when we went from the 19th to the 20th century, there was a clash of generations that led to solutions called global institutions that worked. We're in the 21st century, the young generation that's coming through is looking at those 20th century institutions and they're not working. They're simply a failing. And so what they are demanding with three major crises, and as the governor said this morning in his speech, we shouldn't react to a crisis by making the crisis our reaction. We've had three major crises that are disruptions that aren't going to go away. We're traveling at the speed of live, and the generations that your children, our children, are used to this instantaneous reaction, and global institutions are not. We're not electing the right people to understand it. We're not actually leading with disruption management in mind. Business that has a purpose earns the right to operate from society, not from its stakeholders, but from society. Reconfiguring institutions and creating communities of common interest is what young generations are screaming for. But stop talking about it, go ahead and get it done.
Interesting.
No, great. Thanks for having us here, Your Highness. And I'll put it in the business perspective as you touched on. So in the US, we touch probably 1 in 2 households, or almost 1 in 2 households. And so being able to talk to the younger generation is an imperative. The way I handle my finances is not the way I think a lot of our kids do. So how we sell financial products, which simply means people's financial lives. How do they save? How do they want to access their cash? How, when they go to a restaurant, do they want to share paying the bill? How do they want to get cash from their parents, who may be in this room sending cash to them? How we interact with them, we have to adjust to the way that they interact with technology, especially. But it's not just the technology, it's also the values and sort of the culture that comes with that. You know, we probably, in our generation, would hate to share our financial sort of statements or affairs, but they do freely. So that's really driving its way through the way we think about our businesses.
So as we look around the world, there can be turmoil and turbulence everywhere, but you can also find moments of absolute beauty and calm. But we look at this young generation and the way they want to solve the problems and the turbulence around the world is perhaps different than we would do it as our generation. My question to you is, as leaders, do you include them in the decision-making process? Do you just listen as you formulate your answers? And where we do need strong geopolitical leadership, where's the voice of youth, and how do we include them?
The Olympics that you're a member of, and I am now privileged to be, our board has youth on the board. So we have representation from the generations on the board. Previously, in previous hierarchies, we never thought of that. Right. You had to climb the ranks to get the right to make the decisions. That has changed because, as I said, it's short-circuiting based on our connectivity. So that is a mandate that must happen. However, I would also challenge those of us who are in the demographic, use the word old, okay?
I didn't say old.
Yeah,
I'm not old.
because
yes.
I certainly don't feel old, and I certainly aren't acting old, and I'm never, ever not going to stop thinking and being engaged. So I do think engagement means all of us, not just saying we've got to satisfy the youth, okay? There's a generation that has wisdom. Now you've got to connect the two in effective bodies. And I think new alliance structures will form, new geopolitical ones, like's happening here. I think the Middle East Green Initiative is a great example of His Highness setting up a new initiative in the region. Jared Kushner talked about it. Yes. There are lots of new alliance structures that youth can be a part of, and that we should have them at the table.
Great.
And I would say, adding to that, without reinventing the wheel, we should give meaning to what we say a lot, diversity and inclusion. So it really is diverse. We're really thinking about that in each of our spaces. And then something somebody said to me recently is really be thoughtful about being inclusive in each setting. And one of the things I challenge all of us is because we're all leaders in some shape or form. And I think if we really live that in terms of, particularly on the inclusive bit, when you're in meetings, really listening out to the diverse group that you have assembled and allowing those voices to be heard. Earlier today, people talked a little bit about a sort of a cancel culture, perhaps, but just making sure that in each of these interactions, you really listen. By the way, it's an absolute business imperative. You will succeed and you'll be more profitable or sustainable or successful as a result. But I think it's perhaps, there's so many other things we can do, but maybe giving meaning to those words that we sort of throw out a little bit lightly these days.
If I could just jump on, I think the next generation is actually tired of us talking. Yeah. I think we've got to absolutely, totally move through the debate and discussion to the actual doing. And I think that's the part that we're all lacking on. So not just measurements, but actually tangible actions to solve the issues of the day that we give acronyms to, like ESG. And if you stay at the high level, everyone can solve ESG. But actually, who's doing it at the E, S, and G level? I think the youth is basically saying, I want to see actions.
Right.
Okay? It's not just confabs and talk. I share that same frustration. I think, Jamie Dimon said earlier, I mean, social media is a good thing, bad thing. Doesn't matter. It's here.
It's here. It's
here. And so this is the way youth communicates. So let's grab hold of that and actually show them tangible, evidence-based examples rather than let the media rule the roost.
So in that spirit, I have a question for you. When we think about the social revolutions of the past, the 60s had a flavor, the 70s, the 80s, do you think that this social awakening that young people are having today is attached to or relevant to those movements of the past? Or are they truly a blank slate? Are they so far removed from that history that it has nothing to do with the experience they're living today? And if so, how do we deal with that lack of legacy and that lack of connectivity as we problem solve?
Well, technology is the great disruptor. And the disruption of this generation is connectivity at the speed of live, as I said earlier.
I love that, the speed of live. It's the best way to explain it.
Yeah, and we didn't have that in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s.
Yes.
I mean, we did find out about things, but they were very distant in far-off lands, and we were taught at school subjects like social studies and things like that. And history books were truly history books. Yes. But now Wikipedia is a history book, and what's true or false in Wikipedia. So the speed of live has changed the whole dynamic for this generation. They're hearing about all the bad things quickly. They're not hearing about the good things that quickly.
Right.
Because the media isn't geared to selling good things. Who reads a good thing and feels good about it?
Trust me, I know how that feels.
I would. There's a lot of different aspects. I've touched on technology. I think when I think about it in the area of media or communicating, if you look at that evolution, it started off as sort of zeros and ones, I guess, and then we moved through 20 years and we realized that actually those zeros and ones performed this other function that wasn't mathematical. It was more cultural and it was more values. And I think the world has then gone and say, well, what is, really fundamental issues, what does truth mean? And even in the financial space, it has driven debates around what's the value of money, what is money, what are synthetic monies and digital monies, etc. And so I think sometimes it takes us a while to catch up from what technology has allowed us to do to give meaning to that. And business sometimes sits at that crossroads. And if we can get the right products and tools from the demand that's coming from the youth, and we end up in the right place. But we really have to be really proactively thoughtful in reaching that.
So is the push for change coming to you from within, from your young employees, or is the push for change coming from your younger consumer?
It's absolutely both. So I was given a lecture by some of my colleagues about having, everything renewable in the offices, et cetera, so you have that. But I would say what occupies my time is how we communicate with the youth that are coming through. And actually, there's an incredible competitive element there. In financial services, there's an incredible amount of fintechs, as they're called. And these are new financial technology platforms driven by the youth who are coming in and presenting age-old products that have been there since time immemorial in a different way. And we are absolutely having to adjust to compete. There are things that we bring to the table. We bring safety to the table. We bring a whole bunch of other boring compliance-type issues. But a lot of the change, I would say, and I would admit, have been driven by incredibly smart insurgents, fintechs from across the world. Some of the digital payment initiatives that the world is latching onto started in East Africa, in Kenya, where it was solving a need. And so we're absolutely having to react to that.
So voices of youth, East versus West. I would say not rich, but wealthy versus poor. Which are the voices we're actually hearing, and who are we not hearing?
Go ahead, Bernard, you go first.
That's a tough one. I think that which voice are we hearing? I mean, by definition, often you're not hearing the ones that are these days not so technologically advanced. There's this concept of digital or broadband as a public good, and I think that will catch on as a theme. We think about water, electricity, or clean air, or defense, and increasingly, I'm not on social media, I don't spend a huge amount of time on it, but for the youth they do. And I think it's important that they're empowered, because I think they will give us signals, whether it's about initiatives or global one. We need to be so inclusive in this space. So my off-the-top answer would be that group who are not so digitally enabled are not being heard as loudly as the rest.
I think the concept of north-south divide, east-west, we saw a map from Richard earlier today that said unhappy people on the left, happy people on the right, is a too high level of flyover. The way I think about the world right now is one voice, many accents, okay? And the many accents are digitally connected or not. If they're not digitally connected, we actually are not hearing with two ears. We're actually just talking with one voice, trying to talk to them. I think the big lesson of leadership, certainly in my leadership positions of the last 20 years, is get out there on the ground and listen very carefully. Communities are being reinvented by the disruption of this century. And as a result of that, whether it's someone in Africa or someone in developed societies in the West, those voices are saying the same thing. We want to be included in the conversation. Redevelop your institutions to include us, because anarchy will set in. And remember last century, 2 world wars, and there's a war on the continent of Europe right now. We are going to see more disruption unless we get this solution space that includes those voices.
So in that concept of anarchy, is it because there's lack of memory, or is it because there's a profound detachment to what was, to what is? And I wonder, does that take us on a healthy path where we could, as Jared said, reimagine the future of peace in the Middle East? Or does it take us, because of lack of institutional memory in our youth, to the dark path because they have nothing to bounce back on or reference?
Well, I think Bernard said it earlier. Where do you get fact from anymore? Perception dominates everything that's out there that connects every one of us. I mean, I challenge people all the time when I do town halls. Where do you go for your facts? What newspaper? What streaming TV cable service? Where do you trust information? How do you do trust and verify? With hacking going on and cyber issues. So actually, institutional memory is being erased by the noise of the moment. And the noise of the moment isn't fact. And there's so much non-facts out there on topics that are very big and important, like climate change. Okay? There's so much fact that needs to be corrected on the energy transition, and it's been talked about today. Yet the people who are out there with the fact get shouted down. by the activist movements of the day. So we've got to stay the course and build institutional memory with facts and remember those sorts of decisions are the best of them all and cross-check them with data. We have plenty of data, as we said on our previous panel.
So the problem before, before things were curated for us, right? So the newspapers or the TV news, because that's how we accessed information. So somebody curated that and said, here's what it is. And now it's not the case, so that's the challenge. Our kids are accessing social. So I run through this thought experiment with my wife the other day. I was reading something about, I think it was something about Elon Musk providing broadband to Ukraine, and he said he might not, etc. And I said, imagine a world in which a philanthropist put out balloons up in the sky and everybody on the planet could access the internet for free. And I rather lazily said, wouldn't this be a good thing? And it was an interesting thought experiment because actually if you did that and it was in every language, would we be okay with that? It's an interesting question for everybody to take home. Because then where are people getting their information? Where are they getting their news? If they go to a particular website or a news channel, is that a good thing or not? On the other hand, the power of that connection is huge. I was in India in July, and the scale at which the informal sector has been formalized through technology is spectacular. So these are complex issues. Doesn't mean we shouldn't tackle them. But to your question about the common history or the past being prologue, etc., is difficult when you have these technological challenges.
So, gentlemen, I thank you, and I encourage everybody in our audience, tell the stories of our history and legacies, because those are the tools that will allow our young people to make the best decisions based on our experience, but also give them the space to take their own journey, because the future is theirs. So, thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you. Thank you, Johannes.
Thank you.
Andrew, thank you. Thank you. Safe travels.